Well, we are at kind of a cool juncture in this class, aren't we? We're seeing some things move along rather quickly and setting us up for the next meta story in the scriptures, which of course is the Exodus, but we've got to get set up first. And this is one of the things that the next few chapters are doing for us. I wanted to point out that there are 7 scenes, if you will, that occur in chapters 46, which we're studying today, in chapter 47. And these 7 scenes, when you see something like 7s, 5s, 3s, oftentimes it's structured by the biblical authors to be a chiasm. So scene number 1 and scene number 7, if this is the case, would be interacting with each other. Scene number 2, scene number 6 would be interacting with each other. Scene number 3 and scene number 5 would be interacting. And then there's a central theme, which is meant to draw our attention specifically to that. And that is exactly what we have for these 7 scenes. The scene 1, which is the first 4 verses we're studying today, Elohim, or God, is preparing Jacob for Egypt. You compare that with the scene 7 in chapter 47, starting verse 27. Jacob is preparing for his death. So going to Egypt and death are a little bit in analogy. There is a metaphor about going to Egypt, going to Babylon, going to the east, or going to Egypt, which is metaphorical for exile, which exile and death are kind of parallel ideas in the scripture. Second, the journey of Jacob's family to Egypt is set on parallel to a degree, or complements the B prime, which is the governance of Joseph over his family, and as well the governance of Joseph over Egypt. We're going to get to that next week when the story takes quite a twist. Just preparing you. The third scene is Joseph is meeting with Jacob, and then that's set on comparison to Jacob meeting with Pharaoh. And then right in the center of all these things is Joseph's brothers meeting Pharaoh. Well, what's the importance of Joseph's brothers meeting Pharaoh? They are the next stage of Israel's story. In a sense, they are Israel's story. These are the tribes of Israel. And their interaction with this pagan, Gentile, non-chosen, oppressive to a degree, we'll find out more about that, ruler over this completely non-chosen kingdom, but very powerful kingdom, is an important part of the storyline. And I can't wait to get to it next week. We're going to spend a little bit of time there. There's something else that's going on here. Scene 1 and scene 7, where Elohim, God, is preparing Jacob for Egypt, and Jacob is preparing for his death. In those 2 scenes, there are 7 allusions to promises that we've already seen in the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob narrative so far. There are 7 promises, or promissory scenes, if you will, that are all being alluded to. Again, this is not accidental. This is something that's been intentionally woven in by the biblical authors. They're brilliant, they know what they're doing. Really quickly, the promise or the statement, I am the God of your father, which we are going to read in chapter 46, verse 3 in a moment, compares to chapter 26. This is God speaking in chapter 26 to Isaac when Isaac and the Philistines stopped quarreling over wells. We get that same statement, I am the God of your father. Second one, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. That's a patriarchal statement. In other words, a statement relating to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We compare that, which we find again in verse 3 in this chapter, to chapter 15, verse 1, when God said this to Abram, right after he had rescued Lot, right after he'd rescued the people of Sodom. Yes, he did in chapter 14. And remember, he refused to take anything from the king of Sodom, paid a tithe to the king of Salem, and then he received bread and wine from the king of Salem. And just after that, immediately after that, God tells him, do not be afraid. And then third, I'll make you into a great nation, which we find in chapter 46, verse 3, the first scene again, compared to what God said to Abram in chapter 12, verse 2, when Abram was initially called, his initial elective calling, if you will. I shall go down with you. We find this in verse 4 of this scene in this chapter, compared to God said the same thing in chapter 28 in Jacob's dream at Bethel. I shall bring you up again, verse 4. Compare that to chapter 15 when there was a promise to Abraham to bring his descendants up out of a foreign land. I wonder where that was. Egypt, of course. And then there's this statement by the narrator to be in the seventh scene, chapter 47, verse 27, about being fruitful and multiplying. And that compares to chapter 17, verse 6, when Yahweh speaking to Abraham relating to the covenant of circumcision. And then Jacob says in chapter 47, the seventh scene, I will lie with my forefathers, or be gathered to my forefathers. And what that relates to is chapter 23, which is the burial place that Abraham had purchased from the Hittites for his wife and ultimately for his descendants to be buried in. So it's an allusion to the land. All these seven things are interacting with scenes that we've already experienced in these narratives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're woven in to activate in our brains as we read it. It's so cool. Chapter 46, let's start with verse 1. So Israel, who's Israel? It's Jacob, right. So Israel set out with all that he had, and he came to Beersheba, and he offered sacrifices to the God of his father, Isaac, Yitzhak. So Israel, Jacob, he's been convinced by his sons that Joseph still lives, and Joseph's got a sweet deal waiting for them in Egypt, and they should leave the land of famine, which is their promised land, but there's no food, and go down to live with his beloved son in Egypt. And so he sets out because of what his sons have told him. Just an interesting note. He hasn't heard anything from God at this point. He's heard from his sons, and he's decided to set out, which I know that there's red flags in our tradition. It's like, no, you can't make a move like that without hearing from God. But he didn't. He set out before he heard from God. And what happened is he's not scolded for it by God. He just isn't. He takes a step of faith, believing he's doing the right thing. And what he really does that is the right thing is that he stops at the place of sevens, Beersheba, and he offers sacrifices. He worships the God of his father Isaac, Yahweh. So in offering sacrifices to God, so first of all, Beersheba or Beersheba is an important place that we've been to before in these Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob narratives. If you recall, it's a place of reconciliation with non-chosen people, Abimelech specifically. So that's the place where chosen and non-chosen can reconcile, and so thus the place has been named. And this is where Jacob makes his offerings to God. And then God speaks to him as a result of worship. So verse 2. And he did this once before, if you recall, in a place of reconciliation with Gentiles. Jacob himself did. It was with Laban, remember? Laban chased him down and, caught up with him, and they reconciled, had a meal together, and worshiped God. Jacob made sacrifices to God. So, verse 2. God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, in Hebrew, Yaakov, Yaakov, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, I've got to talk about this. He said, Hineni, or here I am. That here I am language, for the careful readers of the Torah, should bring up, and will bring up with you, that traumatic, powerful incident in Genesis chapter 22, when Abraham is going about his business after exiling his oldest son, as far as he knew, to death, did not die, but he's pressed to do that. And so God speaks to Abraham, calls him by name, and Abraham answers, Hineni, here I am, which it does mean here I am, but it has a connotation of, I'm here for you. I'm here for you. And what did God ask Abraham to do? It was rough. Hey, this is what I want you to do. I want you to take your son, your only son, the one that you love, and I want you to offer him to me. We've been through this chapter, okay? It's very, very powerful and disorienting, but powerful. And then along the way, you remember there's this, it's a 3-day journey, interestingly. But along the way, the servants are left behind, and it's just Abraham and Isaac, his son, and they're going up the mountain. And Isaac has this moment. It's like, wait a minute. We got the wood. We got the rope. Where's the sacrifice? And so he says, my father. And what does Abraham answer him? Hineni. I'm here for you. Imagine what's going through Abraham's mind. And so Isaac asks him these questions. And Abraham says, and it's so beautifully ambiguous in Hebrew, God will provide the sacrifice, my son. That can be legitimately read in one of two completely different ways. It can be read, God will provide the sacrifice, my son. It can also just as legitimately be read, God will provide the sacrifice, my son. He doesn't know which it will be. He finds out. God stays his hand and provides a lamb. But here's another Hineni moment. Here I am. I'm here for you. So I think we're supposed to have that story uploaded when we hear these words. Then he, God, said, I am Elohim. I am God, the God of your father. Don't be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also assuredly bring you up again. Joseph will close your eyes. So in the biblical narrative, this is the last time we hear about, or we read about, God speaking directly to a person until we have Moses standing before a burning bush somewhere around 400 years later. And what happens with Moses being faced with the voice of God? God says, I want you to go down. First of all, I am God. I'm the God of your fathers. And I want you to go down to Egypt and I'll be with you, right? So you see the bookends that are happening here? So it doesn't mean this is the last time God spoke to anyone in 400 years. That's not the biblical author's claim. But the fact that in the narrative, it's the last time we see it until Moses, kind of puts these two incidents, we're supposed to compare and contrast them. So very close to those statements in Exodus 3 and 4. Then Jacob left Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob, and their little ones, and their wives in the wagons, which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock, their possessions, which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and came to Egypt. Jacob and all his descendants with him, his sons and his grandsons with him, his daughters, his granddaughters, all his descendants he brought with him to Egypt. This is a foreshadowing. I think I wrote parallel, but I think foreshadowing is a better word. Exodus chapter 4, verse 19, when the Lord says, "Now the Lord said to Moses and Midian, go back to Egypt, for all the men there who were seeking your life are dead." So God's saying to Jacob, it's okay, you can go, I'll be with you. And then the going there is a foreshadowing of what's going to be happening in the mighty book of Exodus. Okay, you ready for this next section here? So this is what I'm going to attempt to do. I'm going to attempt to read the most familiar names in the anglicized way, and the less familiar names, I'm going to give a close to the Hebrew pronunciation, I hope, so just pray for me. All right, so now these are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt. Jacob and his sons, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and the sons of Reuben, Henoch, Palu, Hetzron, and Carmi. And the sons of Simeon, Yemuel, Yamin, Ohad, Yachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman, interestingly. And the sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And the sons of Judah, Onan, remember them, Shelah, Peretz, and Zerah. But and Onan died in the land of Canaan. I'm sure you remember that story. And the sons of Peretz were Hetzron and Hamul. And the sons of Issachar, Tola, Puvah, Yob, and Shimron. And the sons of Zebulun, Sered, Elon, and Yahi. And these are the sons of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob in Padan Aram, with his daughter Dinah. All his sons and his daughters, by Leah, it's talking about here, 33. And the sons of Gad, Ziphion, Hagi, Shuni, Etzbon, Eri, Arodi, and Areli. And the sons of Asher, Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, Beriah, and their sister Sarah. And the sons of Beriah, Hever, and Malchiel. These are the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban gave to his daughter Leah, and she bore to Jacob these 16 persons. The sons of Jacob's wife, Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin. Now, to Joseph, in the land of Egypt, were born Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asenat, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. And the sons of Benjamin, Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gerah, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Mupim, Hupim, and Ard. These are the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob. 14 persons in all. And the sons of Dan, Hushim. And the sons of Naphtali, Yazil, Guni, Yezer, and Shalem. And these are the sons of Bilhah, whom Laban gave to his daughter Rachel, and she bore these to Jacob, 7 persons in all. All the people belonging to Jacob who came to Egypt, his direct descendants, not including the wives of Jacob's sons, 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2. All the people of the house of Jacob who came to Egypt, 70. So, all that to get to this sacred number, 70. I mean, there's a lot going on here, actually, but we're going to focus on the 70, not counting Ephraim and Manasseh. So you could say 72, but 70. Do you remember back in Genesis 10 how many nations were scattered regarding the Tower of Babel? It's actually, Genesis 10 is discussed before the events that led to that scattering. But the table of nations, do you remember how many there were? 70, not counting Israel and Edom. So you could say 72, but 70. Isn't that interesting? So when Moses is singing to the Israelites much later in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 8, he said that God assigned these nations according to the sons of, and there's a major textual manuscript controversy that you will see reflected in different translations of your Bible in Deuteronomy 32:8, and it's quite significant. He either designated the number of nations according to the number of the sons of Israel, which is what the Masoretic text says, which is usually our gold standard. But older manuscripts, including Dead Sea Scrolls, including the Septuagint, don't say sons of Israel, they say sons of El, which is God. So, deep rabbit hole. Either way, who were the sons of Israel? How many of them were there? 70. If it means sons of God, then we have the Deuteronomy 32:8 worldview, which makes a lot more sense of Psalm 82, which is that God assigned spiritual beings over these dispossessed nations, and those spiritual beings became corrupt. I know. Then you read Psalm 82 and go, oh, that's who he's talking to. You can choose either, okay? You don't have to go down the rabbit hole, but I'm making you aware of it. So 70 or 72, again, whether you count Israel and Edom, if you do, that's 72, if not, it's 70. Do you remember how many, and so the 70, it relates to Gentiles. You see what I'm saying? That's the Table of Nations thing. It relates to the other families of the earth. How many disciples did Jesus send out to the villages that were in the Decapolis region, that were at least largely Gentile? 70. 70. Okay, this is so nerdy. There is another manuscript issue with Luke chapter 10, where some manuscripts say 70 and some say 72. I just think that's so cool, because we have this 70-72 thing going on from page 10 of the Bible. But the idea here is this: all these 70s relate to the goals of Israel's story. There were those in Israel that thought that Yahweh's connection to them and choosing them as a special nation just meant that they were going to power through and be powerful over all someday, conquer all, or at least be able to kick everybody else out, and that was and you will be a great example of what it's like to be chosen. But that is not the story of Israel. The story of Israel is, first of all, the means through which God will reconcile with humans, all humans. Remember, we have this dispossession of the human race's relationship with God that happens on page 3 of the Bible. It's described there. And there is going to be a chosen one the seed of the woman, who's going to come forth and crush the head of that serpent. He will be crushed while he's doing it, but he's going to crush the head of that serpent. And what's going to happen is, God and humans will be reconciled. But there's something else that is here, and that is not just the reconciliation of humans to God, but the reconciliation of all these families of the earth that were scattered at Babel with each other, because after all, they are related. They are related. God's purpose in specially choosing one people, one line descended from Abraham, is not just so that they could be separate forever. It's so that they could be the means by which, and especially the one that comes from that line, the means by which all the families of the earth are reconciled to one another. So We get a hint of that in Luke chapter 10, when the 70 are sent. That's hint number one. Hint number two comes in the second chapter of Acts. Interestingly, when the disciples are filled with the Spirit, tongues of fire over their heads, and they start speaking in languages that are known by, they're Jewish people, but they're Jewish people from all these pagan lands. They're like, praising God in my language. I'm from Cyrene. These are uneducated, fishermen. And how do they know my language so well? What's going on here? So you see how, and actually if you study the regions in Acts chapter 2 that are called out, I think there's either 15 or 23 different nations that are called out, and they all encompass a very similar area to the 70 nations in Genesis 10. There's no question that there's meant to be a call out to that. Oh, but that's not all. There's a little thing that happens in Acts 2 with the house of this Roman centurion named Cornelius. These are pure Gentiles. They're interested in the Jewish God, but they are not Jewish. And Peter, after being spoken to by God in a dream, shows up at the house, is like, I guess I better start preaching. And while he's preaching to them, he hasn't had an altar call yet, nothing. They start speaking in tongues. He's like, well, you haven't been baptized. This is out of order. And the Holy Spirit's just doing what the Holy Spirit wants to do. So Paul, the Jew of the Jews, when he gets his apocalyptic moment, and I think it's Acts chapter 9, and he's like, oh my goodness, everything. I've been studying this my whole life, and now I've met the risen Jesus, actually met him. He shows up just for me. The resurrected Jesus says, okay, I'm coming back for this dude. And he's like, okay, here's the mission. We're spreading this to the Gentiles, to the families of the earth. This is what this is about. And so we get kind of the final hint. So did you ever see that little note at the end of Revelation? Where it's like you've got the holy city, which has come down from the heavens to the earth, and the nations are streaming into it. What does that even mean? This is not just a narrow ethnic salvation. This is through the chosen people, all the families of the earth to be blessed and saved. Okay, so I know I've taken that like a whole Bible tour just through this number 70, but it's so important. Every time you see 70, most every time you see 70, it's in some way relating to this incredible epic story. Verse 28, okay, so Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph. So who's the front of the caravan here? Judah, remember Judah. To guide him to Goshen, that's the garden place. And they came into the land of Goshen. So who is leading them to the garden land? Judah. So started out not so good at the beginning of our story. The story of Joseph at any rate. Not such a good start. He is the trafficker of his little brother. He in Genesis 38, it's like there is no hope for this guy at all. But he has a moment at the end of Genesis 38 where, so here's this woman, Tamar, who is treated unjustly by Judah. And so she, has her rights. She wants her rights. And she does that by disguising herself, pretending to be a prostitute so that he will have sex with her and she could get pregnant and have the child that she needs to have security and a lineage and all of this without telling him, just steals his ID. And Judah, when he finds out that she's pregnant later on, he's like, burn her. Just burn the lady. Didn't call her lady probably. And she's like, okay, well, here's your ID. And then he has this moment that defines his character. Because what happens when most people are confronted with their sin, especially by somebody who makes them look really bad in front of others? Usually you get defensive, you double down. I didn't do anything wrong. It was you. But his response is it's seismic. And his response is, you know what, you're more righteous than I am. I'm a worse sinner than you are. And you just pointed that out. And this is the turning point in Judah's life, to where he can actually get to the stage where he can intercede. I think it's in chapter 44. He is the one, first of all, that intercedes to his father. Let me bring Benjamin down to Egypt, and if something goes sideways, let the blame always fall on me. So he's willing to carry the blame, even if it's not his fault. And then when he gets to Egypt, things do go sideways because of Joseph's manipulation. He intercedes on behalf of all his brothers, especially Benjamin, and offers himself as a slave. Offers himself to be what he sent Joseph into. That's why the chosen line goes through Judah. That's why he's the head of the caravan. He's the new head of the family. He's not the oldest brother, and he's not the youngest brother, but he's someone who's willing to intercede for others and let himself take the blame. It's a big deal in the Bible. Okay, verse 29. And Joseph prepared his chariot. That's the first little red flag, actually, for the faithful Torah readers that have been reading for their whole lives. Chariots coming from Egypt is not really supposed to be a good thing. But maybe it's just a minor detail that doesn't mean anything. So Joseph prepared his chariot, went up to Goshen to meet his father, Israel. So he's not going to Israel specifically, he's just going to the garden land. But there's a chariot coming. And as soon as he appeared to him, Joseph did what he did with Benjamin, did with his brothers. He threw himself on his neck and wept on his neck a long time. This is the very first time that father and son, who had such a close relationship. Joseph was the favored child. He was given the fancy long sleeve tunic, right? And since Jacob sent his son to go check on his brothers because their shepherding responsibilities had to do with shepherding, sent him off to the field to go check on their shepherding. And then he never saw him again for 22 years. This is a big moment. It's a big moment. Then Israel said to Joseph, okay, now let me die, since I've seen your face, that you are still alive. In Jacob's mind, his life circle is complete. All his prayers have been answered. His desires have been satisfied. That's all he wanted, was to see the face of his beloved son again. He doesn't die for a while, just spoiler. But in his mind, he's like, this is all I wanted. So what happens next is that Joseph is going to ask his family to do something to ensure the welfare of his brothers and flocks. Do you remember when Jacob sent Joseph off to check on his brothers? It was to check on the welfare of his brothers and their flocks. And now Joseph is going to do that same thing with his brothers. Anyway, Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, all right, I'm going to go up and tell Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and my father's household, you know, the ones who are in the land of Canaan, they've come to me. And the men, they're shepherds, for they've been keepers of livestock, and they've brought their flocks and their herds and all they have. Okay, that's what I'm going to tell Pharaoh. So when Pharaoh calls for you and says, what's your occupation? What do you do for a living? Guys, this is what you should tell him. Oh, well, your servants have been keepers of livestock since our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers. So if you say that, then you can live in the land of Goshen. Because shepherds, an abomination to the Egyptians. Goshen is a little bit of a set-apart land. So what Joseph wants to do is ensure that the brothers don't get intermingled to live with the Egyptians, because they'll disappear. They'll disappear as a people. But Goshen is relatively uninhabited. So how do you get Pharaoh? Now Pharaoh might say, hey, come live in the cities, live with us. We want you to have the best. He's like, Pharaoh is already, we've already talked about Goshen, but if you want to secure this, you gotta point out that you're shepherds. Because to the Egyptians, it's like, ew. Okay, go out over there. So it's almost like humble yourself, and then you'll be exalted in this land. So Israel, the idea here is Israel is being reconciled to the Gentiles, but they still need to stay distinct from the Gentiles because the snake crusher has not appeared. Unless it's Joseph. Could the snake crusher be Joseph? Maybe he's the one that we've been waiting for all this time. It's don't find too much fault in Joseph. Maybe he was a little bratty when he was a teenager, a little. You could read it different ways. But yeah, he's been a suffering servant. He's suffered for the redemption of others. He's put in this great position of power. He is uniquely positioned to be the snake crusher. So the reason I say this is because if you're an ancient Israelite reading the Torah, this, especially for the first time, this thought is going to occur to you, which is why we have next week. Next week shows us why Joseph is certainly not the snake crusher. I just want to share this quote by Gordon Wenham, who's one of the, my favorite 11 or 12 commentators on the book of Genesis. I go back and forth with a few of them. There's some great ones. But his comment on this, I think, is helpful. Having underlined Jacob's prophetic gifts as the recipient of these great promises, and the promises at the beginning of the chapter, the narrative draws attention to his present pathetic weakness. The Jacob who had triumphed over his elder brother Esau and defeated the angel at the Yavok is now so infirm that his sons have to lift him onto a cart to carry him to Egypt. The promises, we learn, will be fulfilled not through human effort, but by divine overruling. Man's power withers like grass, but the word of our God will stand forever, Isaiah 40, verse 8. And the sustaining power of God's promises is illustrated by the fact that a large group of descendants, 70, it's a sacred round number, accompany Jacob into Egypt. A little bit of a cliffhanger. Next week, we see Joseph's fall and set up for the Exodus. So, coming to the table now so that we can see if there are any reflections that you all may have on today's lesson or where we're at so far.
Hi.
Still?
But
Crystal is, by the way, is so cool. I enjoy when she asks something because my normal answer to her is, I never thought of that. I don't know.
I don't know if
So
that'll
I'm
be tonight.
gearing myself up for that.
Now you're setting me up for failure.
No, it's not.
Okay, going back to that in scenes 1 through 7 and the 4, comparing that to Jacob when God told him that I shall go down with you. I was struck by that when Jacob went to the land where he would meet Rachel and Leah, that he had both blessings, came out with a family, but he also had oppression and slavery as he worked for the 2 daughters.
So you're paralleling the traveling of Jacob from his family in Canaan to Laban's household in the east, which, again, in the ancient Israelite mind is associated with Babylon and that whole deal. And so him going there, even though God's with him and he's got all these promises, he ended up being a de facto slave to Laban.
Yeah.
And so you're comparing that to I'll be with you going into Egypt, almost like I wonder if we're going to have the same slavery situation. That's interesting.
And then Joseph as the, similar to that role of Jesus as the suffering servant, being the forerunner, similar to Jesus in Hebrews 6, 19 and 20, where he's the forerunner, even as Jesus.
Yeah, right on. Right on.
And then Goshen, it started with a garden, ends with a garden. This one seems like a garden of their own making.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for sure there's a lot of reflection to be done on Goshen and its relationship to the Garden of Eden and how the Gan of Eden. So, yeah, how much of it is yay, and how much of it is watch out. If you recall from the Abraham narrative, you remember when Abram and Lot had to split up because there were too many for the land to sustain them, and Abram's like, you just pick whatever part of the land you want, and Lot looked, and he saw this Jordan Valley there, and he's like, this is lush and beautiful, just like the Garden of Eden. I mean, Sodom and Gomorrah are there, but it looks so good. And so, I choose that. So, I do think there's a bit of a tension in the story. Is Goshen going to be a return to the garden, or is it going to be a return to that garden? Good question. Awesome.
No, I got nothing.
What hit me square between the eyes this morning as I was looking over the lesson and meditating upon it was the number 70. 7, of course, being the number of completeness or divine completeness, 10 being the number of fullness. But, a farmer, when they get ready to plant something, they'll usually wait till the ground is ready. They'll wait till the ground has thawed, the spring rains are coming. And I saw the 70 going into Egypt, not as 70 people, but as a seed. And I said, God, what are you trying to show me? And the reply was simple. He says, I plant seeds in dry seasons, the famine which brought them to Egypt. So 215 years, roughly, between the promise that God gave to Abraham for a son to Joseph. Only 70 people. But now they're going into the land of Goshen, a place which Egypt was someplace which everybody said, never trust the Mizraim, never trust the Egyptians. It's a troublesome place of deception, place of this, that, and the other. Don't go there. Isaac said, never go to Egypt. And here they are. Goshen, yes, in 30 years, they will be taken as slaves. But Goshen has become a womb because in the 400 some odd years that they are in that land, that 70 people multiplies into 2 million people coming out. And Passover ended just this last Sunday at sunset, which strange duality there between Resurrection Day and Passover. So the lesson is sharp. Yes, they were slaves. But this is the forge that God used to stamp the identity and the culture and the beliefs of a people which have blessed the earth to this day. It just right between the eyes. And then I'm asking, so what does it have to do with today? You know, there are a lot of folks today that go through rough times. I mean, could be loss of job, sickness, anything. God still plants seeds in dry seasons. And he wants to know, are you going to look at the problem or are you going to look at the promise? That seed will bear much good fruit. And that's why I ended up doing so much yard work today, because it kind of buzzed me a little bit and I was running around like a crazy man. But anyway.
So I think Thais said that she wants you to get more of these revelations because the yard work done today was pretty significant.
We have a small yard. I'll have to go start doing the neighbors.
The neighbors are all praying that you do that. Thank you. Thank you for that reflection. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. So we have time for a couple of questions. And Centella, I think you told me we have a couple of questions.
When you say the heel of the snake crusher will be bruised or crushed, when is this shown in the Bible to Christ, or is this yet to happen?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, sometimes it's good to have clarity on things like that. Sometimes I just kind of zoom through things without giving clarity because I like to let your own minds jump to the conclusion, but it's not always helpful for me to do that. So thank you for asking that question. I really do think that the New Testament authors are communicating to their audience that the snake crusher has come in the Messiah Jesus, and that he is the fulfillment of what was promised in Genesis chapter 3, the third page of the Bible. He is the seed of the woman who will crush the head of the serpent, although his heel was crushed. So the idea is that, and this is something reiterated in other parts of the Bible, Psalm 22, Daniel chapter 7, Isaiah 53. I mean, there's lots of the Joseph story where the one experiences a kind of death or a real death. And so Jesus does truly die. But the resurrection shows that the head of the serpent has been crushed. And the sin and the penalty of sin has been overcome. The gates of hell can't prevail over the after effects of this thing. And death doesn't have a sting anymore, because the way to everlasting life in the age to come has been opened up. And I think that this is the sort of thing that Jesus taught in his Luke 24 Bible study to his disciples by opening up their minds to the scriptures, meaning the Old Testament, and how it has all been about him all along. And for years, I used to get frustrated that Luke didn't include the details of that Bible study. I mean, that's so tantalizing. Here you're telling us that Jesus opened their minds to show them how it was about him all along. And would it be nice if you spelled it out? We could use an extra book, just, spelling that out. But I think that's what the New Testament is. It is the spelling out of what that means. Thank you for the question.
In verse 4, when God says, and Joseph will close your eyes, what does this infer?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm reading out of the New American Standard, which I like to use for our Bible studies. I like other versions too, a lot. But I like NASB for Bible studies, along with a couple of other versions, because it tends to literally as much as humanly possible. It's not possible to do it completely. Word for word, as much as possible from the Hebrew. And then when they have to supply a word so you can kind of get the understanding of the sentence, they put it in italics, which I just find that very helpful. But the idiom is to close one's eyes. It's another way of saying to die or to fall asleep. So Joseph will close your eyes, meaning is that Joseph will be there when you die. And this is something of great comfort as a promise to Jacob, because having his beloved favorite son that he thought he had lost, but now is found again and becomes the deliverer of the entire family through his suffering, that he'll be there when he breathes his last. Breathes his last is something that we say in English, right? So close your eyes would be something similar in Hebrew.
And then we have a few from last week. So isn't the blessing of Pharaoh similar to the blessing Abraham received from Egypt, and that being in Egypt leads to them being enslaved?
Gold star. Gold star. So, yeah, Pharaoh is, he wants to bless, or he does bless last week, the sons of Israel. And yeah, there's a danger in Pharaoh's blessing. And we're gonna see that play out. We're gonna see that play out. On the one hand, it's not black and white in this particular instance. It's not like, well, getting blessed by a Gentile, we should always avoid getting blessed by Gentiles. We don't want that. That's not the case. Because remember, part of the promise to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12 is, I'll bless those who bless you, right? It's not bad, but it's risky. It's risky when there are other factors at play. And here in this story, there's always other factors at play, usually surrounding the potential of one human being to power play it over another human being, and sometimes one group over another group. Fighting for the top by pushing others down is kind of the human way, and that way leads to all sorts of ruin and the need for deliverance. That's a big part of what the biblical story is about.
Is all of the fourth generation moving to Egypt also part of punishing the guilty?
That's a good question. So we're riffing off of the Exodus 34, 6, and 7, which is, I'll by no means acquit the guilty in verse 7, but visit the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth, meaning third and fourth generation. And so here's Joseph, generation number 4 from Abraham, who oppressed his Egyptian slave, female slave, and in some pretty awful ways. And so here is Joseph, fourth generation, who is being oppressed as a slave to the Egyptians. And the question is, well, what about the whole family? Is that whole generation now coming into oppression? And I'd have to think about that more. My initial response to that is that Joseph carried that himself for the sake of his family, which is what has led them into this time of blessing, which doesn't last forever, but they are in a time of rescue and blessing, and their lives have been slaved, and they're put in position, even though it becomes a crucible of suffering eventually, they're put in a position to be fruitful and multiply.